The Chevrolet Monte Carlo is a two-door coupe copyright which was produced by Chevrolet through 6 generations from model year 1970 to model year 2007. It was marketed as a personal luxury coupe through most of its history, with the last model version being classified as a full-sized coupe. When it was discontinued in 2007, it had outlived many competitors that were either discontinued many years earlier or changed in concept to either a 4-door sedan or small sport coupe. The Monte Carlo endured 6 design generations. The first 4 were of a rear-wheel drive, V8-powered coupe style, utilizing separate body-on-frame construction. The later rear-wheel drive generations bucked the trend of unit body construction, along with smaller engines, that became more prevalent in the early 1980s as automakers downsized their vehicle lines to meet increasing stringent fuel economy regulations in the aftermath of 2 energy crises that led to gasoline shortages and skyrocketing pump prices in 1973-74 and 1979-80. Despite those trends, the Monte Carlo remained a popular seller and even regained the SS version from mid-1983 to 1988 with a high-performance 305 cubic-inch V8. Following a several-year hiatus following the discontinuation of the rear-drive Monte Carlo after 1988, the nameplate was revived for 1995 on a front-drive, V6-powered coupe based on the Chevrolet Lumina sedan. It was succeeded by the 6th and final generation Monte Carlo in 2000 that was built alongside the Chevrolet Impala, which succeeded the Lumina as Chevy's mid-sized sedan. The Monte Carlo SS was revived from 2000 to 2007 and initially powered by 3.8-litre V6, later to be replaced by a 5.3-litre V8 for 2006 Euro 2007. First generation, 1970, for the 1968 model year. GM instituted a split wheelbase policy for its A-platform intermediate-sized cars. 2-door models would have a 112 in wheelbase, 116 in for sedans, and 121 in for station wagons. In 1969 they broke their own rules with the introduction of the Pontiac Grand Prix, a 2-door which used A-platform layout but stretched the area ahead of the firewall to make it a full 116 in long. This gave the design an unusually long hood, which was very successful and propelled the new Grand Prix to greatly outsell its larger B-body predecessor, despite higher prices. The new layout was first known as the A-body Special, but would evolve into its own class known as the G-platform. The Monte Carlo started as a Chevrolet counterpart to the Pontiac Grand Prix, as conceived by Elliott M. Estes, general manager of Chevrolet, and Chevrolet's chief stylist, Dave Holes. They modeled the styling on the contemporary Cadillac Eldorado, although much of the body and structure was shared with a Chevrolet Chevelle. New exterior Coke bottle styling featured concealed windshield wipers. A light monitoring system was optional. A mid-1990s article in the magazine Chevrolet High Performance stated that the first-generation Monte Carlo was known to Chevrolet management under the working name Conquer. Usual practice at the time was that all Chevrolet model development names started with a C. At one point, the proposal called for a formal coupe, sedan, and convertible. It has been noted that the sedan resembled a full-size Oldsmobile 98 prior to the use of the GMG platform, with at least one photo showing the pull-up door handles that would be introduced on the 1971 half Camaro and 1971 Vega and full-sized Chevys, but not appear on Monte Carlos until the second-generation model debuted in 1973. When the car debuted for the 1970 model year, the only body style available was the 2-door hardtop. Though the Monte Carlo was developed at Chevrolet under the leadership of Pete Estes, it was formally introduced in September 1969 by John Z. DeLorean, who succeeded Estes as Chevrolet's general manager earlier in the year after previously heading the Pontiac division, where he led the development of the Grand Prix. The standard powertrain was the 350 CID Chevrolet Turbofire small block V8 with a 2-barrel carburetor, rated at 250 HP at 4500 rpm and 345 lb-ft of torque at 2800 rpm, mated to a column-mounted 3-speed synchro mesh manual transmission. Front disc brakes were standard equipment. The dashboard was basically identical to the Chevelle except for fake wood trim, according to Holes, a photographic reproduction of the elm trim used by Rolls-Royce, and higher-grade nylon upholstery and deep twist carpeting were used. Base priced at $3,123, the Monte Carlo cost $218 more than a comparable Chevrolet Malibu. Various options were available. A 2-speed power glide automatic transmission, 3-speed turbo hydromatic, or a 4-speed manual. Most Monte Carlos carried the turbo hydromatic. Variable ratio power steering, power windows, 4-season air conditioning, power seats, rally wheels, strato bucket seats, center console, full instrumentation, and various other accessories were also available, bringing the price of a fully equipped Monte Carlo to more than $5,000. Optional engines included the 4-barrel carbureted turbo Fire 350, a CID small block V8, rated at 300 HP at 4,800 RPM and 380 lb-ft at 3,200 RPM, the Turbo Fire 400 with a 2-barrel carburetor, rated at 265 HP at 4,800 RPM and 400 lb-ft at 3,800 RPM, and the Turbojet 400 with a 4-barrel carburetor, rated at 330 HP at 4,800 RPM and 410 lb-ft at 3,200 RPM. Note that the two Chevrolet 400 CID V8s offered this year were actually two different designs. The 2-barrel carbureted Turbo Fire 400 was a small block Chevrolet V8 engine, similar, but very different internally, to the 350, while the Turbojet 400 was a slightly enlarged version of the 396 CID big block V8 and had an actual displacement of 402 CID. The most sporty and powerful option was the Monte Carlo SS 454 package. Priced at $420. It included a standard Turbojet 454 of 454 CID with a 4-barrel carburetor, rated at 360 HP at 4,800 RPM. It also included heavy-duty suspension, wider tires, SS 454 badging, and an automatic load-leveling rear suspension. The turbo hydromatic transmission. The rear axle came standard with a 3.06 ratio but was available in 2.56 and 3.31, although it still cost $222 extra. Weighing only a bit more than a comparably equipped Chevrolet SS 454, the Monte Carlo SS was quite a fast car, although it accounted for less than 3% of Monte Carlos sold in 1970. A labor strike at Chevrolet's Flint, Michigan assembly plant during the early months of the 1970 model year immediately following the car's introduction on September 18, 1969 limited overall model year sales to 159,341. Short of the projected 185,000. During those early months, Monte Carlos were in short supply, with full-scale production not happening until February 1970, leaving many would-be buyers disappointed after going to their Chevrolet dealers and finding no Monte Carlos in stock. However, once full production got underway, Monte Carlos sold briskly and mostly at full list price, making it a very profitable model for Chevrolet and its dealership networks. SS 454s, however, did not sell so well in 1970, with only 3,823 of the 1970 Monte Carlos being the most sporty and powerful model in the range. 1971, the 1971 model saw only modest styling changes. Inside, the SS model got new European cymbal knobs, and a 4-spoke steering wheel became optional. The 1971 Monte Carlo also saw the addition of a stand-up hood ornament. Mechanically it was largely unchanged, although the small block Turbo Fire 400 2-barrel engine was dropped. Other engines had compression ratios lower to allow the use of regular leaded, low lead, or unleaded gasoline, per a Gram corporate edict. Engine ratings fell to 245 HP for the base Turbo Fire 350 CID 2-barrel, 270 HP for the Turbo Fire 350-4V, and 300 HP for the Turbojet 400. The SS 454 engine was actually raised to a nominal 365 gross HP despite the reduction in compression ratio. This increase in horsepower was a result of the 454 engine using the more aggressive camshaft from the 390 HP 454 used in the 1970 Chevrolet Corvette and full-size sedans. Chevrolet listed both gross and SAE net horsepower figures in 1971 with the impending change to SAE net ratings in 1972. The ratings compared as follows. There has been no documented case of a 1971 Monte Carlo SS car with a 425 HP LS6 version of the 454, with solid valve lifters and a longer duration camshaft, previously found in the 1970 Chevrolet SS 454. However, they did come with an LS5 454. The turbo-hydromatic officially remained the only transmission for the SS. But a heavy-duty clutch option on the order form suggests that it may have been possible to special order a 454 LS6 with a 4-speed manual transmission. The exact number of such combinations, if any, is unknown since they were not officially listed as factory options but possibly assembled through Chevrolet's central office production order process that had previously made possible model engine combinations not officially available. However, there has never been a documented case of such a combination. Chevrolet records indicate that the factory only installed the LS6 installations in Corvettes that year. The SS 454 package would be discontinued after this year following production of only 1,919 units, but the 454 CID V8 engine would remain optional in Monte Carlos through 1975. The reason given for discontinuing the SS was that the Monte Carlo was marketed as a luxury vehicle instead of a muscle car. The SS nameplate would be resurrected 12 years later. Yet, at the same time that the Monte Carlo SS was judged a failure in the marketplace and discontinued, the Monte's reputation as a performance car on the racetrack was gaining strength because Ford and Chrysler were ending their factory-backed racing support due to declining muscle car sales and the need to divert dollars to meet costly federal safety and emission regulations. As factory support ended at Ford and Chrysler, the stock car racing mantle switched to independent teams and sponsors, who overwhelmingly chose Chevrolets over Ford and Chrysler products due to Chevy's much greater availability and affordability of over-the-counter racing parts through the Chevy dealer network. And the Monte Carlo was considered the best-suited Chevrolet model for stock car racing by most NASCAR teams due to its 116-in wheelbase and long hood design which placed the engine further back in the chassis than most other vehicles for better weight traction. Thus the Monte Carlo became Chevy's standard bearer for NASCAR from 1971 to 1989. Like its 1970 predecessor, production of the 1971 Monte Carlo also got off to a slow start due to a labor strike, this time a 67-day corporate-wide walkout that coincided with the introduction of the 1971 models in September 1970, leaving dealerships with only a small shipment of 1971 models in stock until the strike was settled in mid-November 1970 and then slow going and reaching normal production levels until around January 1, 1971. Model year production ended at 128,600 including the 1,919 SS models. AM/FM stereo radios with 8-track tape players were optional. 1972, a Cadillac-like egg crate grille similar to the 1971 Chevrolet Caprice and a metal rear trim molding highlighted the changes to the 1972 Monte Carlo, the final year for the first-generation design. The SS was dropped, but a new Monte Carlo custom option appeared as a one-year-only offering that included a special suspension and other items previously included with the SS option. Unlike the departed SS package, it was available with any engine on the roster. The Monte Carlo custom badging was similar to the Impala custom. The engines were largely unchanged, but an industry-wide switch to SAE to HP numbers led to a reduction in the rated power of all Chevrolet engines. Chevrolet did not list gross horsepower figures for 1972. Compared to 1971 figures, only the 402 and 454 had a decrease in power. The new ratings for the Monte Carlo were 350 CID, 2-barrel, 165 HP, 350 CID, 4-barrel, 175 HP, 402 CID, 4-barrel, 240 HP, 454 CID, 4-barrel, 270 HP. In California, which had emissions standards more stringent than federal law, the 4-barrel carbureted 350 was the standard and only available engine. Also, the only transmission offered in California was the turbo-hydromatic. For 1972, the 4-speed manual transmission was discontinued from the option list as a line in the Monte Carlo brochure describing its market position as a personal luxury car stated "Sorry, no 4 on the floor." The standard 3-speed manual and optional 2-speed Powerglide automatic transmissions were offered only with the base 350 CID 2-barrel engine, with the 3-speed turbo-hydromatic also available with this engine and a mandatory option with each of the optional engines. Mechanically, the most significant change was that variable ratio power steering became standard equipment for the first time. Interior trim was relatively unchanged from 1971 other than the availability of all-vinyl upholstery with a standard bench seat in addition to the optional strato bucket seats. Cloth interiors were also offered with both bench and bucket seats. Monte Carlo was a very popular seller during the 1972 model year as production increased significantly to 180,819 to set a new record in the final year for the first-generation A-body. Monte Carlo and other Chevrolet models were promoted as part of a new ad campaign in which Chevys in print and broadcast ads were featured at various tourist attractions and sites around the United States under the tagline "Chevrolet, building a better way to see the USA." Second generation, 1973, a redesigned Monte Carlo was introduced alongside other GM intermediates. Like other GM mid-size cars, the 1973 Monte Carlo was no longer a hardtop, but a pillared coupe with rear-side opera windows and frameless door glass. Prominent styling features included an egg crate grille with a Monte Carlo emblem in front and vertical tail lights above the bumper. The front bumper was a large federally mandated 5 mph bumper that was among the required 1973 federal safety standards for all passenger cars sold in the U.S. with a 5 mph requirement extended to rear bumpers on 1974 models. Also new was a double shell roof for improved noise reduction and rollover protection along with the flush-mounted pull-up exterior door handles first introduced on the 1970 A1A2 Camaro and 1971 full-sized Chevrolets and Vegas. The separate body-on-frame construction carried over for 1973, as was the basic all-coil suspension. For improved ride and handling, the 1973 Monte Carlo featured a number of innovations such as standard radial ply tires, ply-shell shock absorbers, high caster steering, and front and rear anti-roll bars. The standard Monte Carlo with manual transmission retained traditional steering and bias ply tires, but the radial tune system was included when the automatic transmission was ordered, earning the Monte Carlo S label. A new model for 1973 was the Monte Carlo Landau, which was basically an S with a rear-quarter Landau vinyl roof, turbine two wheels and driver and passenger side sport mirrors. The interior of the 1973 Monte Carlo featured an all-new, wraparound cockpit-style instrument panel, similar to that found in some contemporary Pontiacs, Oldsmobiles and Buicks, in which gauges and various instruments were centered within easy reach of the driver. The simulated bell elm trim was retained. A split bench seat was standard, but strato bucket seats of a new design were optional, along with a floor console featuring an equally new shifter with knob and button similar to Pontiac's Rally Sports shifter replacing the Buick-like horseshoe shifter of previous years, and storage compartment. The bucket seats were of a one-piece high-back design with built-in headrests, and could swivel some 90 degrees to permit the driver and front passenger easier entry and exit. Cloth and vinyl trims were offered with both the bench and bucket seats. The standard engine was a 145 HP 350 CID Turbo 5 V8. Optional engines included a 175 HP 350 CID V8 with a 4-barrel carburetor and a 4-barrel carbureted 454 CID turbojet V8 rated a 245 HP. The 1973 Monte Carlo was named Motor Trend's Car of the Year, due to its new styling and emphasis on Euro-style ride and handling. The 1973 Monte Carlo set a new sales record for Chevrolet, with nearly 250,000 sold for the model year. The success of the Monte Carlo and Pontiac's similar Grand Prix led to several new personal luxury cars from competitors, including subsequent Mercury Cougar, the Ford Torino Elite, the Chrysler Cordoba and restyled Dodge Charger, and even high-line versions of the AMC Matador, which got a swoopy new coupe design for 1974. 1974. The 1974 Monte Carlo received only minor detail changes from its 1973 predecessor, most notably a revised air-crate grille in the front, flush-mount taillights, a shorter trunk deck that housed the relocated license plate and the trunk lock mechanism. In 1973 the trunk lock was below the trunk deck and above the rear bumper in a space that no longer existed on the 1974. A larger 5 mph rear bumper was added, and in the interior the driver and passenger door map pockets were no longer available. The base Monte Carlo with manual transmission, standard suspension and bias ply tires was discontinued, leaving only the S and Landau models equipped with radial ply tires and upgraded suspensions along with standard power steering and front disc brakes. A 3-speed manual transmission was listed as standard equipment on 1974 S and Landau models equipped with the standard 350 CID V8, and an automatic transmission was a required option with the larger 400 and 454 CID V8s. However, a number of sources indicate that Chevrolet built virtually all 1974 Monte Carlos with the turbo-hydromatic transmission. The standard 350 CID Turbo 5 V8 was again rated at 145 HP with 2-barrel carburetor in 49 states. For Californians, the standard engine was a 350 Turbo 5 V8 with a 4-barrel carburetor rated at 160 HP that was not offered in the other 49 states. Reappearing on the Monte's option list for the first time since 1970 was a 400 CID Turbo Fire small block V8 rated at 150 HP with a 2-barrel carburetor or 180 HP with a 4-barrel carburetor. The top engine was again the 454 CID Turbojet Big Block V8 rated at 235 HP. Despite the Arab oil embargo of late 1973 and early 1974 that greatly cut into sales of standard and intermediate-sized cars in favor of smaller compacts and imported subcompacts, the Monte Carlo went the other way on the sales charts by setting a new sales record this year of over 300,000 units despite the long lines at gas stations and record-high gasoline prices. The Monte Carlo continued to lead in intermediate personal luxury car sales with the Grand Prix placing second and the arrival of new competitors this year, including an upsized Mercury Cougar, Ford Torino Elite and AMC's Matador Coupe. Chrysler would introduce its entries in this field for 1975 including the Chrysler Cordoba and redesigned Dodge Charger. Interior dimensions, 1975. The 1975 Monte Carlo received only minor styling changes from the 1974 model, including a new grille with the Monte Carlo emblem moved to the center section and new vertically shaped tail lights with horizontal louvers. All models received catalytic converters to meet the latest federal and California emission requirements that included bonuses such as improved fuel economy and drivability, along with longer spark plug and muffler life, but required more expensive and lower-octane unleaded gasoline. Engines were carried over from 1974 except for the addition of GM's high-energy electronic ignition being made standard equipment. However, power ratings for all engines were decreased due to the addition of the catalytic converter. The 454 CID V8 no longer offered on California cars, leaving the 400 CID 4-barrel the top engine in the Golden State. The base 350 CID 2-barrel was rated at 145 HP, the 350 CID 4-barrel was rated at 155 HP, the 400 CID 4-barrel 175 HP, and the 454 CID 4-barrel 215 HP. A 3-speed manual transmission was standard equipment with the base 350 CID V8 used in 49 states and California only 354-barrel V8. The turbo-hydromatic optional and a required option for the 400 and 454 V8s. Chevrolet sources, however, report that virtually all 1975 Monte Carlos were equipped with a turbo-hydromatic transmission, which became standard equipment for 1976. New for 1975 was a custom interior option that included a plusher cloth 50/50 bench seat with recliner on passenger side and lower door panel carpeting. The standard interior still consisted of a bench seat with knit cloth and vinyl or all-vinyl upholstery. The swiveling strato bucket seats plus console and floor shifter were still optional with knit cloth or vinyl upholstery. Also, white all-vinyl interiors were available for the first time this year with either bench or bucket seats with contrasting colors for carpeting and instrument panels including black, red, blue and green. A gauge that showed if one was using too much gas, a part of the economizer gauge package, became optional. Sales dropped off a bit from 1974's record-setting pace due to higher prices resulting from the addition of the catalytic converter, double-digit inflation and new competition from Chrysler's Cordoba and Dodge's Charger SE. Monte Carlo production ended up at around 250,000 units but would rebound to set a new record in 1976. A 1975 Monte Carlo was featured that year in a Chevrolet TV ad with the patriotic theme of America's favorites including baseball, hot dogs, apple pie and Chevrolet. 1976. A new crosshatch grille and vertically mounted rectangular headlamps, along with reshaped tail lights identified the 1976 Monte Carlo. Under the hood, a new 140 HP 305 CID 2-barrel V8 became the standard engine with the 145 HP 352-barrel V8 and 175 HP 400 CID V8 both optional. California cars got a 165 HP 354-barrel as the base engine, and could be equipped with a 404-barrel V8. The big block 454 CID V8 was discontinued from the option list this year. The turbo-hydromatic transmission became standard equipment on all 1976 Monte Carlos. Interior trims remained the same as 1975 with both base and custom levels, but the instrument panel and steering wheel featured a new rosewood trim replacing the burled elm of previous years. A new option was a two-toned fashion tone paint combination. Monte Carlo sales hit an all-time record with production of 353,272 units this year. 191,370 S coupes were made. 161,902 Landau coupes which were $293 more. 1977. A revised grille with the Monte Carlo Knight's crest emblem moved to a stand-up hood ornament and revised tail light lenses marked the 1977 Monte Carlo, which was the last year for the 1973 vintage design before the introduction of a downsized 1978 Monte Carlo. Engine offerings were reduced to 2 engines for 1977. The base engine for 49 states was the 140 HP 305 CID 2-barrel V8 and the 170 HP 354-barrel V8 was optional. The 400 cubic inch V8 was dropped as an engine option. The turbo-hydromatic transmission was included standard equipment. Interior trim received only minor revisions this year with upholstery choices including cloth, velour and vinyl in both base and custom trims. This model year marks the only time in history when an intermediate model was larger in every dimension than a full-size model, as the B-body Chevrolet Caprice Impala had already been redesigned and downsized for 1977. Third generation, 1978, all GM intermediate-sized cars including the Monte Carlo were downsized for the 1978 model year in response to the 1973 Arab oil embargo and CAFE requirements. The 1978 model was 700-800 lb lighter and some 15 inches shorter than the 1977 model. The 1978 model also had more interior and trunk space than the earlier 1977 model. The engines offered in previous years were dropped in favor of a standard 231 CID V6 built by Buick or an optional Chevrolet 305 CID V8. New one-piece wall-to-wall carpeting was standard. The 3-speed manual transmission reappeared for the first time in several years as standard equipment on the base model with the V6 engine, and the automatic was optional. The optional V8 and all Landau models came standard with the automatic. A 4-speed manual transmission with floor shifter was optional with the 305 V8, the first time a 4-speed manual was offered on the Monte Carlo since 1971. 1979. Only minor trim changes were made to the 1979 Monte Carlo, which included a slightly redesigned grille, tail lights and front parking lights and dual headlights. The turn blinkers for the front of car are on fender's lower corner. Mechanical changes included a new Chevrolet-built 200 SCI DV6 as the standard engine for the base Monte Carlo in 49 states, while the Buick 231 SCI DV6 remained standard on base models in California and all Landau models. A new 125 HP 267 CID V8 became optional and the 140 HP 305 CID V8 continued as an option but was joined by a 160 HP 235 LBFAFT version with a 4-barrel carburetor. The same transmissions were carried over from 1978, including a standard 3-speed manual and optional 4-speed manual, or an optional 3-speed turbo-hydromatic automatic. This would be the last year that Chevrolet would offer manual transmissions on the Monte Carlo due to extremely low buyer interest. A black 1979 Monte Carlo was used by Michael Platt and William Mateix during the 1986 FBI Miami shootout. A 1979 Monte Carlo with single front headlights was used, modified to a lowrider, was also heavily featured in the 2001 movie Training Day. The car was owned by the main character Detective Alonzo Harris, played by actor Denzel Washington. 1980, the car had a mild frontal restyle, with quad headlights and amber indicators mounted beneath. The metric 203-speed automatic transmission became standard on all models and a new Chevrolet-built 229 SCI DV6 with 2-barrel Rochester carburetor replaced both the 200 SCI DV6 of 1979 and the Buick engine offered on all 1978 models in the 1979 Landau as the standard engine in 49 states. A new option for 1980 was Buick's turbocharged version of the 231 SCI DV6 rated at 170 HP. Other optional engines included 267 and 305 SCID versions of the Chevrolet small block V8 with up to 155 HP. Front headroom was 37.6 inches, while rear headroom was a little bigger, at 37.8 inches. A power trunk opener was still optional. There were a total of 13,839 Turbo Monte Carlos for 1980. Fourth generation, 1981, the body was restyled with the other GM mid-size formal coupes. It featured a smoother profile than the previous models and new vertical tail lights similar to the 1973-1977 models. Engine offerings were carried over, including the standard 229 SCID Chevrolet 5.6 and optional 267 SCID V8, a 305 SCID V8 in the base and Landau models, and a turbocharged 170 HP 231 SCID Buick 5.6 in the Monte Carlo Turbo. There were a total of 3,027 Monte Carlo Turbos for 1981. This would make the Monte Carlo Turbo one of the rarest Monte Carlos built, even rarer than the 1987 Monte Carlo SS Aero Coupe. The Monte Carlo Turbo appeared slightly different from other Monte Carlos that year because in addition to the turbo motor it also was equipped with a small hood scoop on the left side of the hood. It also had turbo 3.8 badges with Chevrolet Botti on the sides of the hood scoop, on the trunk lid, and on the right side of the dash. An automatic transmission, power steering and power front disc brakes were standard equipment. While this car was considered by some to be much better looking than its Buick Regal, Pontiac Grand Prix, and Olds Cutlass cousins, only one team tried to make a go of it in NASCAR Cup racing. While the big Monte Carlo was the dominant body style in the late 1970s, winning 30 or so races, the downsized 1981 body would only take 3 checkered flags in the 1981 and 1982 seasons when it was run. 1982, only mild revisions were made on the 1982 Monte Carlo. All engines, except for the turbocharged 231 SCI DV6, which was discontinued along with the Monte Carlo Turbo model, were carried over from 1981. New for 1982 were the additions of a 260 SCID V6 and an Oldsmobile 350 SCID V8, both of which were diesel engines. With the introduction of GM's new mid-size platform that saw the introduction of the Buick Century, Chevrolet Celebrity, Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra and Pontiac 6000, the chassis designations were shuffled up. The new mid-size cars were designated as A-body cars, whereas the cars previously designated as A-bodies were now called G-bodies. A black exterior was not offered in 1982 and also not available in 1982 for the first time in Monte Carlo history was a sportier interior option with strato bucket seats and console, as only the standard notchback bench or optional 55/45 bench were offered this year. Weight distribution was 57% in the front and 43% in the rear. 1983. Receiving only minor updates, the 83 Monte Carlo gained a revised grille and interior trim patterns. The standard engine continued to be the 229 N3 V6, and the 165 HP 305 N3 V8 was optional. The Super Sport package, Z65, was once again made an option in 1983. The Monte Carlo SS was reintroduced in 1983, following 12 years of being discontinued. The Monte Carlo SS featured European body color coding, a new front fascia, a rear spoiler and a V8. 1984, the SS was a hit not only in the car-buying public, but also in NASCAR competition, where it continued to be a winning body style after the 1984 season successes. Production picked up, and 112,730 sport coupes were sold as 1984 year model coupes. An additional 24,050 had the SS Option 305 V8 that saw a 5 HP boost from the previous year, having an asking price of $10,700. The Monte Carlo SS was available with strato bucket seats and floor console as extra cost options for the first time in place of the standard split bench seat with armrest. The regular Monte Carlo came standard with a 125 HP 229 SCID V6 and a 165 HP 305 V8 was optional. Available for the last year in a base Monte Carlo was the 350 SCID diesel engine, and there were only 168 manufactured. All engines for 1984 got the 3-speed automatic transmission with the exception of 3 SSs at the end of the 1984 production run that received the turbo-hydromatic 200R4 transmission with overdrive. In 1984, there were a limited number of Monte Carlo SSs made in Mexico, for Mexico sale. The differences are many in the Mexican to US Canadian SSs. There was no rear spoiler. The rims are 14 inches checker style, an option on the base Monte Carlos in the US. The side mirrors are different style and black. The interior is that of a Grand Prix, in blue. The engine is a 350, 265 HP and 350 lb-ft of torque, and got a 4-speed manual with Hurst shifter. Additional information about the Mexican SS, 1985, T-tops were reintroduced, and additional SS colors, pinstriping, and options were made available. The medium blue color for the SS was dropped. A 4-speed automatic overdrive transmission, the turbo-hydromatic 200-4R, with a revised sport rear axle ratio containing 3.73:1 gears became standard on the SS. Gone for good were the 229 CID V6 and 350 CID V8 diesel engines. Introduced in place of the 229 CID V6 was a 262 CID V6 that was fuel-injected with throttle body fuel injection. The V8s were fitted with computer-controlled quadrajet carburetors. The 1985 Chevrolet Monte Carlo, Chevy's rear-wheel drive personal luxury car, got more power, but for the first time since 1981, no diesel engine was offered in the Monte Carlo. In the 1985 Chevrolet Monte Carlo base model, the previously standard 3.8L Chevy V6 gave way to a larger 4.3L V6 with throttle body fuel injection. That brought along 20 extra horsepower, for a new total of 130. The optional 5.0L V8 likewise gained some ponies, via a jump in compression ratio. It jumped from 150 horsepower to 165. The high-output 5.0L V8 in the 1985 Chevrolet Monte Carlo SS remained at 180 horsepower. 10.5-inch front disc brakes was standard. A C was $730. The V6 and base V8 could be backed by either a 3 or 4-speed automatic transmission, but the HO V8 in the SS came only with the 4-speed automatic this year. Though the base coupe carried on visually unchanged, the SS was a different story. Previously offered only in white or dark blue metallic, color choices were expanded to include silver, maroon, and black. Removable glass roof panels came on board as a mid-year option. Nearly 120,000 Monte Carlos found eager buyers in 1985. Though the total was down somewhat from 1984, the SS model saw sales climb from 24,050 to 35,484, a sure sign that performance was making a comeback. The 1985 Monte Carlo SS also came stock with a 35mm sway bar which added extra support for the high-performance rear end. 1986 For 1986, there were 4 distinct body styles available. The base model Sport Coupe was still available with the same general body panels that it had since 1981, but featured new aero side mirrors similar to those on Camaros and Chevrolet Corvette of the 1980s. New for the 1986 model year was a luxury sport model that had a revised front fascia, new aero side mirrors, and an updated sleek-looking rear fascia. The LS front fascia included Euro headlights with removable bulbs and a glass composite headlamp housing, versus the smaller sealed beam glass headlights of previous years. The rear bumper of the LS no longer had a notch between the bumper and trunk, and the tail lights wrapped around so that they were visible from the sides of the car. The Super Sport model for 1986 incorporated the aero mirrors, yet still utilized the prior year's styling for the rear bumper. Also new this year was the Coupe model. The Coupe was created by modifications to the Super Sport body, including a more deeply sloped rear window and a shorter trunk lid sporting a spoiler that lay more flat than previous Super Sports. Only 200 Coupes were sold to the public, which happened to be the exact number NASCAR officials required for road model features to be incorporated into the racing cars. 1986 Monte Carlo SS Coupe Registry and Information, 1987. In 1987, Chevrolet eliminated the Sport Coupe version of the Monte Carlo, leaving the LS, SS, and Coupe. The Super Sport incorporated the smoothed rear bumper and tail lamps first introduced on the 1986 Luxury Sport. The Coupe made up 6,052 of the 39,251 total Super Sports that were produced that year. 39,794 luxury sports were produced in 1987. 1988, this was the last year for the fourth-generation Monte Carlo. The 1988 models were actually built in late 1987, with only 16,204 SSs made for an asking price of $19,320. Appearance and mechanicals were similar to the 1987 model. The 1988 model only came with the lay-down style spoiler, unlike the 1987 model, which came with either the lay-down or stand-up type spoiler. The Coupe did not return, as Chevrolet had unveiled plans to produce the Lumina and race that body style in NASCAR. The new Lumina body style was much more aerodynamic and negated the need for a sleeker version of the Monte Carlo SS. The Lumina Coupe was introduced as a 1990 model to replace the Monte Carlo. Total production numbers for the final year of the rear-wheel drive Monte Carlo was 30,174 €, almost half of the 1987 numbers. The final G-body Monte Carlo, a silver SS Coupe Euro, was produced on December 12, 1987. Total SS production for 88 was 16,204. Fifth generation, 1995 Euro 1999, for the 1995 model year, the mid-size Lumina was split into two models, with the sedan continuing as the Lumina and the Coupe reviving the Monte Carlo nameplate for its fifth generation. The new car rode on an updated W-body chassis shared with the Lumina, Pontiac Grand Prix, Oldsmobile Cutlass Supreme, Oldsmobile Intrigue, Buick Century and Buick Regal, and by its nature was the first front-wheel drive Monte Carlo. In 1995, the LS was $16,770 and the Z34 was $18,970. All 1995 Euro 2007 Monte Carlos were built in Oshawa, Ontario, Canada. Unlike Monte Carlos of previous years, the distinctive bulges to the front fenders and rear quarter panels were gone. A special runner 41995 Z34s were made called the Monte Carlo Brickyard 400 pace car. The $2,195 option included interior ornamentation, embroidered leather 45/55 seating with full floor console, an aero-wing spoiler, and an accent stripe package. For its 4-year run, the Monte Carlo was available in 2 trims, the LS and the Z34. Appearances were largely identical between the 2 models. Styling changes consisted mainly of the special red-colored badging, a lower front air dam, and blacked-out trim on the Z34, the real difference being under the hood. LS models were powered by the 3.1 L3100 V6 putting out 160 HP at 5,000 RPM and 185 lb-aft, while Z34s featured a more powerful 3.4 LDOHC V6 engine with 215 HP and 220 lb-aft. Aside from minor equipment changes, the 5th generation remained virtually unchanged during its life. In 1998, the 3.4L was replaced with a 3800 Series 2. All Z34 models came with 16-inch alloy wheels, optional on LS models in place of the standard 15-inch steel wheels with bolt-on wheel covers. 1998 to Euro 1999 Z34 models received redesigned 16-inch wheels, though the older style alloys remained on the LS. Though derided by some for its indistinct lines and its front-wheel drive drivetrain, the 5th generation sold well enough for Chevrolet to continue the line with a more original redesign in 2000. The 1995 body style was also a favorite on the NASCAR circuit and enjoyed considerable success at the track. This generation of the Monte Carlo was the last 2-door non-truck vehicle featuring 6-passenger seating, although bucket seats were available as an option with a floor-mounted shifter. Production totals, models, 6th generation, 2000 to Euro 2005. For 2000, Chevrolet not only again called upon GM Motorsports for design inspiration, but also to Monte Carlos of the past. Among the traits carried over from older Monte Carlos were the stylized wheel flares, vertically oriented tail lamps, and a stylized rear bumper. Another classic trait for 2000 was the return of the night badging, as well as a full-gauge cluster, not seen on the Monte Carlo since 1988. Back again was the Super Sport moniker, replacing the Z34 designation of the 5th generation, which was a Lumina coupe legacy. At the request of racing teams, Chevrolet stylists added a slight hump on the rear trunk, similar to, although smaller than, a Lincoln Mark. It was a distinct trait that stayed with Monte Carlo until its demise, even though later in the generation every trim level would get a spoiler that all but masked the hump. From the NASCAR circuit came the aerodynamic styling and ducktail spoiler. Specialty nameplates, Chevrolet released several models inspired by then-current NASCAR drivers. The first model released was the 2002 Dale Earnhardt Euro OE Intimidator Edition. This car had one color scheme. A black body with Galaxy silver rocker panels and front and rear air dams. A thin red stripe above the silver ground effects was also included. Just behind the rear side windows, the Dale No. 3 logo was placed. The car also featured silver Euro OE Intimidator Euro SS badges on the right side of the trunk and standard Monte Carlo SS badges the bottom of the vehicle, just in front of the rear tires. An Intimidator badge with the No. 3 also appeared on the dash, and Earnhardt Euro unregistered trademark air signature appeared on the gauge cluster. This edition also came with 5-spoke, diamond-cut wheels and received GM's L36-3800 V6 engine. In 2003, the Jeff Gordon edition was released. The vehicle came with a superior blue body and silver ground effects, just like the Intimidator edition. However, The Jeff Gordon edition also received lighter blue ghost flames on the body. It featured the number 24 behind the rear side windows. A Jeff Gordon signature was placed on the right side of the trunk, and inside the car received a Jeff Gordon badge on the dashboard and a two-tone grey or black leather-wrapped steering wheel and shift knob. It featured the 5-spoke, diamond-cut wheels and received GM's L36-3800 V6 engine. In 2004 the Dale Jr. edition came out. It was red in color and sported a black high sport kit. The number 8, with an A-Euro stripe design carried from the doors to the rear bumper. The 5-spoke diamond-cut wheels featured a black stripe through each spoke, and Dale Jr. unregistered trademark S signature appeared on the right side of the trunk lid. On the sides, the vehicle received Monte Carlo SS badges. Inside on the dash a number 8 badge appeared and Dale Jr. unregistered trademark S signature on the cluster. This edition also got number 8 floor mats and headrests. This was also the first nameplate car to receive GM's L67 supercharged 3800 V6 engine. To compete, the Intimidator edition was re-released in 2004. This time, however, the vehicle featured a Euro OE Intimidator Euro badges on the trunk lid and both side panels of the vehicle. The car was all black in color, received the 5-spoke, diamond-cut wheels and this time received GM's L67 supercharged 3800 V6 engine. 2005 marked the next and final nameplate, the Tony Stewart edition. It was all black, but featured a white-orange line that thickened as it reached the back of the vehicle and contained number 20 just before the rear tires. Tony Stewart Euro unregistered trademark S signature also appeared behind the rear windows on both sides. The Chevy bogey on the trunk was white on this edition and another was painted on the front of the hood. The Monte Carlo badge was removed and instead replaced by the black Tony Stewart grille. The wheels were the same design as the Dale Jr. edition, except the bogey on the center cap was white this time. This edition also received GM's L67 supercharged 3800 V6 engine. Pace cars. To keep with the popularity of the Monte Carlo in NASCAR, GM released several Monte Carlos branded as a Euro OE pace cars. A Euro each year featured a different color and all cars were limited to production numbers, however. All cars did have some things in common. All pace cars received Galaxy silver ground effects, checkered flagging on fenders and doors, TAZ decals on quarter panels and trunk lid behind the Monte Carlo script. It also has a race-inspired rear spoiler that resembles the look of the NASCAR spoiler, limited edition plaque on trunk lid, Monte Carlo script on the dash is replaced with PACECAR, gauge cluster displays limited edition below the speedometer where it would say apply brake to shift from park, 16-inch diamond-cut cast aluminum wheels, door-opening kick plates featuring the Monte Carlo nameplate, and stainless steel dual exhaust tips. Interiors had two-tone leather in 2000 through 2002 to match exterior, with 2003 being solid black and Chevy bow tie embroidered headrests. All cars also came with GM's L36-3800 V6 engine. 2000 pace car, production limited to 2,222 cars. Sports two-tone leather black and red. Exterior, torch red with Galaxy silver ground effects. 2001 pace car, production limited to 1,300 cars. Sports two-tone leather black and silver. Exterior, black with Galaxy silver ground effects. 2002 pace car, production limited to 1,150 cars. Sports two-tone leather black and yellow. Exterior, competition yellow with Galaxy silver ground effects. 2003 pace car, production limited to 1,401 cars. Sports leather ebony black seats with ebony and grey leather wrapped steering wheel. Exterior, superior blue metallic with Galaxy silver ground effects. Models, trim levels initially consisted of the LS and SS, the latter being the first front-wheel drive SS in the Chevrolet lineup. The LS used a 3.4 LOHV V6, while the SS got the 3.8 LV6. A supercharged SS model was added for 2004 and 2005, though the naturally aspirated SS continued as well, but was relabeled as Lieutenant Production Totals. Refreshed 6th generation, 2006 Euro 2007, the facelifted 2006 Monte Carlo was introduced at the 2005 Los Angeles Auto Show. The base engine was a 3.5L V6 producing 211 HP. Trim series for this generation include the entry-level LS, the mid-level LT, the upper-level LTZ and, the top-of-the-line SS. The most notable news, though, was the SS model's use of the Generation 4 small block V8 the first V8 since the 1988 model. The 5.3L V8 produced 303 HP, which raised some eyebrows considering the fact that it was being placed in a front-wheel drive car. The interior for 2006 was mildly redesigned. Models, the LT and LTZ model were available with the 3.9L engine in 2006. For 2007 the LTZ model was dropped along with the engine in favor of utilizing the flex-fuel 3.5L as the exclusive engine for non-SS models. Production totals, discontinuation, the Monte Carlo ceased production at Warsaw Car Assembly Plant No. 1 on June 19, 2007, following an announcement in February 2007 of its demise. General Motors has released this statement. On Tuesday, June 19, 2007, the last two 2007 Chevrolet Monte Carlo models rolled off the line at the Warsaw Assembly Plant. The last two models were identical SS models with precision red exterior paint, silver rally stripes, and ebony nuance leather interior. The two models features the SS 5.3L V8 engine with its best-in-class rated 303 HP. 18 inches polished aluminum wheels, heated exterior mirrors, and AM/CD and XM radio. The final Monte Carlo off the production line was retained by GM for their Heritage Center collection. The second-to-last Monte off the line, the last saleable unit, was auctioned off on August 15, at Mannheim Stadtesville Auto Auction in Stadtesville, North Carolina. The winning bid went to Fred Simon, owner of Simon Chevrolet in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, where it is on display on the dealership floor. This unit was at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway over the weekend of July 27 Euro 29 for the 2007 All-State 400 at the Brickyard. While there, it was signed by all the current Team Chevrolet drivers who were active in the NASCAR Sprint Cup Series. The future of the Monte Carlo. While it was speculated that General Motors was considering a rear-wheel drive replacement for the Monte Carlo, GM product development chief Bob Lutz later confirmed that the North American Zeta program was not being expanded. The Chevrolet Camaro filled the coupe position in Chevrolet's lineup, beginning in the 2010 model year. NASCAR. From 1972 until the car's end of production, the Monte Carlo was a solid success in NASCAR racing. The big-bodied cars were the dominant body style through the years until 1980, when NASCAR mandated the move to the smaller cars being built by Detroit. The 1981 and 82 stock Monte Carlo was raced by very few teams and as such only won 3 races in those years. Starting in 1983 with the addition of the SS nose, the Monte Carlo SS became the dominant body style in NASCAR through the rest of the decade when the car went out of production. The car came back to racing in 1995 when Chevy brought the car back into production, and it sparked a mild bit of controversy as NASCAR allowed the car to have wider rear fenders, and as such deviated from factory sheet metal, that up until that time the race-spec cars had to use. The car brought Chevy repeated NASCAR Manufacturers' Cup awards until it again was discontinued from production, and was replaced by the Impala for racing. References